Did you know? The Sony PlayStation we know today is the result of a deal gone bad between Sony and Nintendo. By the late 1980s, compact discs were becoming increasingly common as a source for media storage for music and video games. Cartridges, like the ones used in the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, could only usually hold around 8 to 16 megabits of data. A CD-ROM could hold 320 times more than that, over 600 megabytes on a single disc. In 1988, Nintendo announced a partnership with Sony to produce a CD add-on peripheral for the Super Nintendo in an effort to advance the console's capabilities. But this wasn't the first time that Nintendo and Sony had worked together. The history of the two companies collaborating started with an engineer at Sony. During the development process of the Super Famicom in Japan, Nintendo expressed the need for a sound chip for their new console. The engineer, named Ken Kutaragi, immediately accepted the offer. Sony had almost no involvement with the video game industry at that time, but Kutaragi developed an interest in video games consoles after watching his younger daughter play the Nintendo Famicom. Without the permission of the board's members at Sony, Kutaragi worked in secret developing the SPC 700, a sound chip that would later cause the SNES to outclass all of its competitors in audio capability. When Sony executives found out what Kutaragi had been working on, they wildly disapproved. It was only because of the support from CEO Norio Oga that Kutaragi was allowed to keep his job and continue the project. The chip was finished and shown to Nintendo with impressive results. The success of this collaboration is what originally spurred Nintendo to initiate the partnership for development of the SNES CD-ROM add-on, with Ken Kutaragi at the head of the project. The contract that Sony negotiated with Nintendo did not only include plans to develop an add-on for the Super Nintendo, but also allowed for Sony to develop their own branded console that would play Super Nintendo games and upcoming SNES CD games. Additionally, this contract gave Sony a large amount of control over software licenses for games produced on the SNES CD format. This deal was rumored to have made Nintendo uneasy, leading them to secretly negotiate a more favorable contract with Sony's rival, Philips. Then, at the June 1991 Consumer Electronics Show, Sony revealed the Nintendo, quote-unquote, PlayStation. One day later, Nintendo announced that they were cancelling the contract with Sony and they were going to partner with Philips for their CD-based peripheral instead. Sony's CEO, Norio Oga, was infuriated and considered Nintendo's actions to be a humiliating betrayal. Then the rest of Sony's board members wished to cease all involvement in video games after the contract with Nintendo was broken. But Ken Kutaragi told Oga that the PlayStation project could be salvaged and produced as a standalone console. Out of spite, Oga insisted to the board that Sony continue working on the PlayStation, and he wholeheartedly supported Kutaragi's plans. Nintendo's deal with Philips was also eventually cancelled, and no CD-ROM add-on for the SNES was ever released. However, due to some original negotiations with Nintendo, Philips was given the license to publish video games on their own console using Nintendo's flagship characters. This led to the infamous Philips CDI games, Hotel Mario, Link: The Faces of Evil, Zelda: The Wand of Gamelon, Zelda's Adventure, and the unreleased Mario's Wacky World. These games were critically panned, and Nintendo doesn't acknowledge their existence to this day. The hardware that Ken Kutaragi chose to utilize with the final design for the Sony PlayStation resulted in the most impressive video game console the world had seen up to that point. Sony correctly predicted that 3D polygon-based games were the wave of the future. The PlayStation was released in Japan on December 3rd, 1994. It was the second console of its generation, competing with the Sega Saturn, which was released 1 month before the PlayStation. The Sega Saturn also had 3D capabilities, but was not directly tailored for that type of gameplay like the PlayStation. Competitively, the PlayStation was also $100 cheaper than the Saturn, retailing at $299. Another unprecedented aspect of the PlayStation was the controller. Almost every other console controller before it had used letters to represent the different input mechanisms, but the PlayStation used the symbols X, circle, triangle, and square. The controller was designed by Sony's Taiyu Goto. Goto explained that the symbols were originally meant to indicate universal functions for game designers to implement into their games. The triangle button refers to the viewpoint. I had it represent one's head or direction and made it green. The square button refers to a piece of paper. I had it represent menus or documents and made it pink. Then the circle and X buttons represent yes or no decision-making, and I made them red and blue respectively. Another prototype controller featured a diagonal T-shaped alignment of rounded trapezoid-shaped buttons. One design looked remarkably similar to a Super Nintendo controller and featured 3 small buttons underneath a larger button. The PlayStation logo also went through numerous iterations. Over 3 dozen designs were drafted before Sony settled on the final appearance. Besides thoughtful design, Sony knew that in order to be successful in the market, they needed quality games. In an effort to court developers, Sony designed the PlayStation to be easy to program for. Additionally, Sony provided a large budget for marketing and charged a small $10 per game licensing fee for full-priced games. Almost 100 studios had signed licensing agreements with Sony before the console was launched, and it's estimated that over 300 game projects were planned or underway. The console that would go on to be the biggest competitor with the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, was delayed multiple times and wasn't released until a year after Sony's console, effectively giving Sony a head start in the market. Also, the Sony PlayStation was the first console to sell over 100 million units worldwide. Then, in 1996, it was announced that Squaresoft, developer of the Final Fantasy series, series, would break their exclusivity streak with Nintendo and sign a deal with Sony instead. Their decision, in part, was due to the lower production cost and larger storage space offered by the PlayStation hardware. In 1997, Sony lowered the barrier of entry for development by releasing a special version of the PlayStation called the Net Yorose. This console was available as a promotion to computer programmer hobbyists, and it came with extensive documentation, special software, and no region lockout. It allowed anyone who was interested in doing so to program games for the console, albeit with their own computer. It sold for $750 and was released in Japan, North America, Europe, and Australia. Also, the boss level Polygon Man from PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale was actually the PlayStation's original mascot in 1995. He was meant to demonstrate the power of the PlayStation with his polygonal design, but he was dropped shortly after the system was announced. This was reportedly because Ken Kutaragi went absolutely insane after seeing him at an E3 booth and wasn't pleased with the character. I'm afraid that's all for today, but don't forget to subscribe to Did You Know Gaming and follow Did You Know Gaming on Facebook and Twitter. Make sure you also check out didyouknowgaming.com, and if you like this video, go and check out our other videos. And if you want to hear more of my voice for some reason, you can have a look at one of my reviews I did a few weeks back on the worst game ever made. Yes, I'm not even exaggerating there. Nobody talks about this game and I'm really confused why, so you're gonna have to see how horrible it is.